I'd like to talk today about war and some of the problems associated with the brutality of war and the attempt to humanize war, the attempt to make war less awful. Everyone, of course, when you think of war, thinks of the horrors of war and how terrible it is. And we've really spent a lot of time as a society grappling with trying to avoid wars, obviously, but also what can we do to make war more humane? Uh, and also the question really of human rights. Can human rights be used in a way by those who want to avoid the idea of justice? So, how do you balance this out? The human rights, respect for people, and the thirst for justice. Uh, a book that has come out about this is by Samuel Moyn, Humane: How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War. So, the whole idea here is what can we do to create a more peaceful society? What can we do to really focus on ways to eliminate war from our thinking, from our approach. And really, in doing this, we have to confront some of our modern illusions about war. There really have been, to this point, two approaches to this very thorny problem. And obviously, it's a thorny problem because we've been wrestling with it for ages. Uh, the one approach is to end all war. And Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer, when people mentioned humanizing war, lessening the brutality in war, said it's all rubbish. It can't be done. War is an evil. The only way to get rid of it is to eliminate it completely. Uh, the comparison that is sometimes used is the efforts in the 19th century to make slavery more acceptable by introducing limits on how badly you can treat the enslaved person. For example, in the 1826 Slave Code. Uh, but the reaction to most people with regard to that was that it certainly did not work because where violence is legalized, there, of course, slavery exists. Now, what about the approach of the humanitarians? Well, the humanitarians look at it this way. They say, you're not going to eliminate war completely. War is a reality. Unfortunately, people have waged wars from the beginning, and they always will. People will try to seek advantage. People will try to gain power, to gain wealth, and will use war as a means to do that. So, what can we do? Well, maybe we can try to alleviate the suffering in a world where war exists. So let's work on that. Let's try to take that approach of alleviating suffering. And how can we do this? Well, we can improve the treatment of civilians and prisoners. We can work on it so that civilians are harmed as much as possible, and also that prisoners are treated in a more humane way, not tortured and not beaten, and that they're treated as really as human beings. We can also do it by publicizing war crimes, making known these terrible war crimes that do exist, and really thinking of ways to eliminate them. If people know about them, if people are aware of them, then maybe we can take steps to eliminate the excesses, the worst excesses of war. And then constrain militaries on how they use violence. So violence certainly has to be used in certain situations in war, obviously, but to constrain the use of violence to make it as little as possible. So that's the kind of humanitarian approach, the approach to, the reality is war. What can we do to take away the harsher aspects of war, to make it as um, humane as possible, to make it in such a way that there will be less suffering involved in war. Uh, in that line, Henri Dumont founded the International Committee on the Red Cross with the idea that if there is this group, the Red Cross, they can help. They can help the wounded. They can protect civilians. They can establish hospitals, and they can alleviate as much suffering as possible that is caused by war. And really, the concept of the Committee on the Red Cross was to make humane the war increasingly humane, and they had, of course, developed the Libra Code and the First Geneva Convention with this in mind. What can we do to make war really less evil, less horrible? For example, William Jay, the son of John Jay, advocated for an international system in which nonpartisan outsiders would adjudicate differences between countries. And there were 150 instances of arbitration between states in the late 19th century. So the idea of the diplomatic channel, arbitration, helping to eliminate, again, some of these excesses of war, and really trying to avoid war altogether. If we can arbitrate our differences, this can be a good thing, can eliminate an awful lot of suffering, an awful lot of destruction, because when war takes place, what takes place with it is the destruction of homes, the destruction of towns, the destruction of farms to produce food, all of these terrible effects associated with war. So arbitration was a way to do that. William Jay advocated for it, and again, much success. I mean, 150 instances where this arbitration worked and it avoided war, so certainly a good thing. Another person who was very famous along this line was Bertha von Suttner. She was a peace activist, and her rallying cry was lay down your arms. So again, a different approach. Lay down those arms, work for peace, make the world better, make the world safer, eliminate the excesses, eliminate the violence. William Jennings Bryan, who was Secretary of State from 1913 to 1915 under Woodrow Wilson, had 30 arbitration treaties signed between the U.S. and other countries. So again, the arbitration route, the diplomatic route, avoiding a lot of conflicts, certainly a good thing, certainly a positive thing. The League of Nations, when it was formed, established a covenant in 1919 and said the acceptance of obligations not to resort to war. So the concept was World War I was terrible, it was awful. Let's do everything we can to avoid more conflicts. Unfortunately, of course, we know what happened. This did not last too long. The Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928 condemned resources to war for the solution of international controversies. So again, the concept of this pact, this diplomatic effort, was okay. There's going to be conflicts between countries. Let's set up an alternative process. Let's set up something different to avoid war completely, and let's work on this because of the terrible destruction that war causes. The Libra Code was an attempt to really, unfortunately, wound up intensifying war rather than restraining it. So, again, well meaning, but unfortunately, it did not have that effect of restraining war. It really wound up intensifying it. The First Geneva Code cloaked the agenda of the states, and again, they used the code in ways that helped them. So again, you have this problem of well-intentioned efforts to restrain violence, well-intentioned efforts to restrict war, but a lot of times states using it for their own purpose, and war and more violence resulted because of that. The Hague Convention of 1898, we had the first Sea Lord John Arbuthnot Fisher said, the humanizing of war, you might as well talk about humanizing hell. So his thought was, it's never going to work. You're never going to be able to humanize war. So let's take a look at that, the whole concept of it, and we'll talk about in our second part different possibilities in terms of approaches to war and how we can avoid the horrors of war.